Let's take a look at how to load instruments and instrument presets. So I've got a default set open if you want to follow along. And notice that in a default set that you get 2 MIDI, 2 audio, and 2 return tracks. If you decide that you want to delete any of these, you can do that by selecting the plugin header and hitting the delete key on your computer keyboard. And notice that you can't get rid of the last track. You have to have at least 1 MIDI or 1 audio track in a live set. Now at a later point, if you want to add a track, you can do that by going up to the Create menu and choosing one of these top 3 options, Insert Audio, MIDI, or Return Track. And we're going to use the first 2 a lot, so I'll suggest that you remember these key commands, which would be Command-T for a Mac or Control-T for a PC for audio tracks, and for MIDI tracks it's going to be Shift-Command-T or Shift-Control-T for a PC. And we'll use those here in just a minute. So let's add a default preset to this one MIDI track that we have. So I'm in the Instruments category. And remember that the folders that we see at the top here, those are the default presets. Now, if I want any of the other presets, I need to open up the folder and select one of these. But I'm going to add just a default preset in this case. Now, I can add this default preset to the selected track a couple of different ways. Starting with, I can just hit the return key on my computer keyboard. If I want to delete that device, I can just select the plugin header and hit the delete key on my computer keyboard. I can also double click to add this, or you can click and drag the plugin from the browser and drop it either on the track itself or down here in the device area. Now, if you decide later on that you don't like what they've done with this default preset setup, you can make the changes here on the plugin interface and then right-click on the title bar of the plugin and choose Save as Default Preset. And that will take your changes and save it to the default preset so that when you drag this default preset onto the track, you're going to get your version of that, not Ableton Live's version. All right, let's add a MIDI track. And if you remember, that's going to be Shift-Command-T or Shift-Control-T if you're on a PC. And let's go down a little bit deeper here and let's go into Wavetable, and I'm going to open up the folder here and take a look. And let's see. In the past, I've used this a thick wave. So let's add this to the track. So I've loaded that preset, and at a later point, I might decide that that's not quite the preset that I want. So I can go over here on the upper right-hand corner of the plugin interface, and I can click this little 2 arrow button, which is called the Hot Swap button. And that will take me back into that category, and I can look around and I can find other presets that I might want to use. And in fact, that'll also allow me to use the Show Similar button. So let me click that. And I'm not quite sure why I've got these 2 presets selected, but let me just swap out this second one. So I'm going to double click that. And add that down here. And then if I'm done, I can go ahead and close this by clicking the X button up here in the plugin header or the swapping instrument X here in the browser. And then I can clear that search and I'm ready to move on. Now, if I make any changes to this preset and I want to save those, let's say I change the cutoff frequency there, I can go ahead and I can click the Save button that's in the upper right-hand corner of the plugin interface, and that'll take me into the user library, into presets, and into Wavetable, and now I can call this something like My Polyjuno Square and hit my return key, and now that's saved for use in a future set. All right, let's take a look at one other thing, and that is if I wanted to load a third-party virtual instrument. So let's go into our plugins category, and there we go. Took a second for those all to display. And let's go down to the bottom, and I'm going to load Vital Audio. Now I want to point out that with third-party instruments, when you open up the folder, you'll notice that there aren't any presets. I've just got these options for loading the plugin itself. So let me grab one of those, and I'm just going to drop it out here in this empty area, which will automatically create a third MIDI track here and load this third-party plugin onto the track. Now, I'm looking at the normal plugin interface here that you would get in any program if you were to load Vital. But notice that in Ableton Live, down in Device View, I've got this device down here that represents all third-party plugins. And if I were to close the actual interface up here, I can reopen that by hitting this little wrench icon on that third-party plugin device. And then I can make any changes that I want. Now, if you want to get to the actual presets that are available for this plugin, you'll have to go through the interface. And in this case, I would click here, which would take me into the preset browser. I can choose something here like Digital Roller, let's say. And then I can close that. And I'm ready to start making changes if necessary. Now, one last thing I want to show you is that when you add a virtual instrument device to a track in Ableton Live, it automatically enables the track. And it does that so that MIDI will pass through the device when you press a key on your keyboard controller so that you can hear sound. And we refer to that as MIDI through. So that's handy because you can immediately start working with that instrument or that instrument preset. So now that we know how to select and load instruments, we're almost ready to begin recording MIDI.